Welcome, everybody. We are very excited to welcome you to this open house intro to Story and Image with writer and feature film designer Dominick Domingo. Dominick, welcome.
Good morning.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what we're going to be doing today?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting this event. You've heard me say it before, but I think during lockdown, during COVID, this kind of inspiration was so needed. And even now, I just love the idea that in cyberspace, we can all continue to learn and grow and inspire one another. So thank you. I'm honored to be part of this. So it's a pretty big question, but who am I, and what have I been up to the past 30 years? I will talk about my career, but mainly to get to the point of talking about this wonderful lecture series that we're offering that I think, CTN and I are both very passionate about. So stop me if I go on too long, because God knows I'm a storyteller. It's right there in the title of the series, but I'm going to force myself to go into a little bit of detail because I tend not to. I tend in my teaching to not talk about myself, and it's a disservice because I think anyone that's going to hopefully join the lecture series should know who's up here and what informs his perspective. So I'll talk about my career, but it's all going to lead to sort of what I'm passionate about and what I'm offering in this course and how I got to this point. So again, if there's any questions about, because I do think it's valuable to hear how people broke into the animation industry. A lot of people are curious about the Cretaceous period, which is when I started at Disney during the 2D phase. And so if there's anything in there that you want to follow up on, Tina, or anybody else, please chime in, because I will try to stick to the bare bones. Okay, so I was born in Glendale, California in 1968. I grew up in Burbank, ironically. So 17 years in Burbank. My first oil painting, so I joke that I came out of the womb with a pencil in my hand. Some artists, in fact, yesterday, Mitch, I think it was his name, was saying, oh yeah, I learned to draw at 20, specifically to become a storyboard artist. And that always baffles me because I did identify as a drawer, that kid who was the drawer at the school. So I joke, I probably came out of the womb with a pencil in my hand. I took my first oil painting class at 7. It's pretty unheard of nowadays. And, I credit my mom for really creating a nurturing environment where creativity was valued above all else. I mean, in her little Dodge Polara, she would literally, I guess they call it a soccer mom now, but my mom shuttled her 4 kids around to, you name it, piano classes, ballet classes, gymnastics, and in my case, oil painting classes. And it was right there at the Creative Arts Center in Burbank. So then at the age of 9, I was given a typewriter for Christmas. I don't know if it came from Santa Claus or my parents, but my parents said this needs to last you until college, which again, I was 9. So quickly, I lost the E key, which is a pretty important vowel. And that was nowhere near college. That was maybe 6 months in, I lost the key. But I kept pecking away and I developed a little callus on my finger. And I was clearly passionate about writing. Maybe not storytelling just yet, but writing. So this will come up later. I would write reports about the Pacific tide pools and undersea life. I was just very intellectually curious about the planet. When people said they were bored, I never quite understood that. I thought, with all there is to learn and explore on this planet, how could one be bored? So I wrote reports about, again, the Pacific tide pools. I illustrated them. I would bring them to school and my teacher would assign them to the class because, of course, I put a Q&A at the end. So that, of course, did not gain me any popularity because it meant more homework for everybody. But anyway, so clearly I had, I think, the inclination, sorry, I'm turning on my prompter. I had the inclination to create images for sure, but I also must have had a storytelling sense that early on, or maybe the typewriter, I don't know, sparked that, or planted that seed. I'm hearing stuff already. So anyway, then, I just did the Burbank school system, which left a little bit to be desired, and I kind of slipped through the cracks in some ways. I was reading college level in 3rd grade, but nobody knew what to do with that. They would take myself and my friend Heather Howe out and do special testing on us, but, really nothing was done about it. So I joke, like in high school, I think I met with a counselor once. Nobody ever told me you need to take the PSATs or the SATs to get into college. So I didn't go the academic route. I was actually vocal music president, strangely, at that high school, John Burroughs. And that program went on to win regularly in the circuit, the show choir circuit, and it became the school that Glee was based off of. So I'm very proud of that. But anyway, I didn't obviously focus on my drawing or painting too much in those years. Toward the end of high school, a friend of mine got a scholarship to Saturday High. And he was at continuation. So he was a bad boy who was kicked out of public school, but then he got the scholarship to Saturday High, if any of you have heard of that, at Art Center College of Design, which is right here in Pasadena. So we both were just, whoa, we'd never experienced anything like it. I mean, part of it was we got to draw nude models, of course, except back then they put little flesh-colored thongs on the genitals, which was probably appropriate for high schoolers. But anyway, we were both very excited and we said, man, we know what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And that sort of pressure when you're about to graduate high school was alleviated because we had a plan, an escape hatch. Now, I hope this is helpful, but actually visiting the campus and meeting with a financial aid counselor and an admissions counselor somehow made it real. It made it manageable. And this came up yesterday in the webinar that I sat in on, this idea of being overwhelmed by goals that are sort of shapeless and amorphous, and then feeling like it's possible when you can break things down into manageable steps. So something about visiting the campus and actually breaking it down and seeing step by step how I could end up at Art Center was huge. So we both enrolled in junior college, and myself at Valley College here in the Valley, and started getting our general ed out of the way. Because at that time they recommended you get all your GE and get a little life experience, because Art Center is literally one of the most demanding programs in the nation as far as private schools go. So he, of course, kind of burned out and quit going to Valley College halfway through the first term. I finished up, got accepted to Art Center, which is a small miracle in itself. My portfolio was probably pretty horrible at that time. In my defense, there were no entertainment tracks at schools. So whether we're talking about the junior college system or even the Cal State, or even private schools, nobody was offering that kind of content. So I'll go into that more later, but even Art Center was recruiting, Disney Imagineering was recruiting from Art Center actively every term. But they were not seeing what they needed to see in a portfolio for theme park design. They were not seeing figures interacting in environments. For that matter, they weren't seeing anything remotely representational or figural. So anyway, I did found the entertainment track at Art Center, and I'm going to go into that in a minute. For that reason, there was a niche. Here we were in Southern California, and entertainment was not being acknowledged at all, let alone animation. So anyway, somehow I found that focus during my schooling. So halfway through Art Center, I kicked a little piece of paper that said internship, Disney feature animation, and it clicked. I thought, first term, I did meet this woman, Jane Bonnet. I was still working at Aaron Brothers throughout my schooling. And I had met a woman who's coming in to frame a figure drawing. I don't know if you know Jane Bonnet, Tina, but she worked in many, many different divisions of Disney. Anyway, she gave me a tour of the building. I was like, wow, I could do this, hot chocolate and popcorn and these little, if you remember the Airway building, there was these huge sort of warehouse buildings with exposed plumbing and brick and electrical and these little cubicles with warm light. It just felt so cozy and wonderful. And I did like to draw. So I thought I could totally do this, but then I put it on the back burner and focused on my academic subjects. Light logic, color theory, perspective, composition, all of that. When I kicked that piece of paper that said internship, the stars aligned. And I'll go into this a little bit because it might help people that are aspiring or trying to get into the industry. When I kicked the piece of paper, I thought, wow, well, I'm not a Disneyphile. I'm not one of those people that read The Illusion of Life and, knew every classic film like the back of his hand. But it came back to me, I really do have a love of Disney content, and it was a huge part of my childhood. Again, I was born in '68, so it was just the right age for all those re-releases. Walt originally had wanted the classics to be released every 10 years theatrically, and that's what was happening for a while until Eisner. And my dad was smart enough to take his 4 kids to the drive-in to see, again, I was just the right age to catch Jungle Book at the 10-year mark, not Aristocats, Sword in the Stone, Robin Hood. Anyway, a lot of did I say Jungle Book? Yeah. Oh, 101 Dalmatians. In fact, I was so young when that hit the 10-year mark that I thought Cruella de Vil was the cartoon version of a family friend because her name was Luella and she smoked and she wore a fur coat. So I didn't know the difference between real life. I thought everybody had a cartoon version of themselves, but that's a side note. Anyway, so I realized, wow, I really do love animation. I do love Disney. The Little Mermaid happened to have come out while I was in college. So because at that time I didn't snorkel or scuba dive, but I did love undersea life, as you know, from those reports that I used to write. So I went to go see that, not only for the shells, but for my love of undersea life. And that ignited my love of animation. Tina knows there was a string of duds, I hate to say it, but right around the time of Black Cauldron, the conventional wisdom is the 9 old men had kind of died or moved on, and there was a lot of genius. Glenn Keane was up and coming, and Andreas, but there was nobody at the helm with a really good storytelling sense. So we used to screen Black Cauldron just to remind ourselves what not to do. So I will say there are some really beautiful gems in there, beautiful backgrounds, beautiful little moments of animation, but storytelling wise, the conventional wisdom is it's a mess. So anyway, when Little Mermaid came out, there's a very good reason that it's been sort of labeled as the beginning of the renaissance of 2D animation. So that film had just come out when I interned there. So we used Arial for my in-betweening to learn animation. My mentor was Ruben Aquino, who was the lead animator on Ursula. And God, that's how long ago it was. I think it was summer of 1990. So Beauty and the Beast was in development, Rescuers Down Under was in production, and Little Mermaid had just come out. Anyway, it was a 14-week internship. They change all the time. This one was not meant to necessarily translate into a specific department, but the entry-level position, should you be offered a job at the end of the 14 weeks, was in between, which is sort of the route for an animator, clean up in between. If that means anything to anybody, because God knows 2D is almost a thing of the past at the moment. Anyway, I did very well during the internship. I was offered a job, and then foolishly, according to some, I said, no, I want to finish up and get my degree. And hopefully there's some value in that too. Dave Zabowski, a friend of mine to this day, who was interning with me, he was one term away from graduating Art Center, and he took the job. He didn't care to finish up and get that piece of paper. So a lot of people think wisely that it's the work that matters, it's the portfolio that matters, and the piece of paper is secondary. I can't argue with that. But for me, there was a valuable lesson in just completion, finishing something. And everybody's different, but for me, I really liked that I kind of had that drive to go back and finish things. Anyway, they said, oh yeah, we'll be right there at your graduation. Just give us a call when you graduate. The job will be waiting, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that wasn't true. So it took some hustling, and I won't go into too much detail, but if anybody cares, you can ask later. I did have to hustle to get back in. There was no internet at the time, so I think I literally called Bill Matthews, who ran the artist development program, meaning the internship. I called Bill Berg, my mentor. I called Ruben Aquino, my other mentor. And I said, hey, I'm ready. I just graduated. And they worked on my behalf. And I got submitted to the regular review board panel. There happened to have been a budget for a trainee. It doesn't happen all the time. But when I say the stars aligned, I mean it. There happened to have been a budget for a trainee on Lion King. There happened to have been a position for a background painter. And Lisa Keene and Doug Ball, the background supervisor, and the art director at the time happened to be in the room that day. The review board panel is just sort of the supervisors of every department on whatever film happens to be in production at that moment. So they could have been out to lunch. It was a small miracle that they were in the room that day. Bill Matthews, the gentleman who ran the internship program, as I said, happened to be there. He did champion me. He said, this kid did very well during the internship, pay special attention to this portfolio. And they chose to give me a background painting test. So I had a week to copy a production background from Bambi and return it. I got the job. So Lisa Keene says to this day, oh, we just thought it was funny because you tested. I actually, when the original artist would test the paint on the sides of the illustration board in the margin, I actually copied every little paint stroke where they tested the paint. And she kind of claims they hired me because she thought that was funny, but that discredits my work, of course. So I will say I did very well during the training. I trained for 6 months. And I had just burned the candle at both ends during Art Center. I graduated with distinction and was one of the few people that worked and paid rent all the way through graduation, and was one of 2 people that graduated with distinction. So not bragging, but kind of saying, even though I don't like the idea of putting the nose to the grindstone and drudgery, because it all felt inspired, it felt energizing, it didn't feel like work, I did work really hard to get that position. And so when I started training at Disney, I had that momentum. I had just graduated. I didn't know any better. I just kept kicking ass. So yeah, they hired me on to production because the 6 months of training was in the early days of pre-production on a little film called Lion King. So that, of course, as we all know, became a global phenomenon, did very well. I went on for 11 years to work on Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback, Tarzan, Little Match Girl, and One by One. Excuse me. The latter 2 are little short films that were meant to be part of the next Fantasia. Long story, but that didn't happen, and they were released, one theatrically and one on a video. If you haven't seen them, check them out. They're really beautiful short films. One by One and Little Match Girl. Anyway, so that, believe it or not, was over 20 years ago now. So you may have heard about the axe fell and 300 people were laid off in one day. So a lot of us saw the writing on the wall and chose to either ride the wave. Basically 2D was transitioning into 3D. So there was a moment, or CG. So there's a moment where a lot of people were going and learning their Maya. Shake and Maya were kind of the state of the art at the time, even though Disney uses their own proprietary software based on an existing platform. Most people went to excuse me, Art Center to learn Maya. A lot of us took the opportunity to jump ship and kind of do our own thing. The supervisor I mentioned on Lion King, Doug Ball, just decided to indulge his gallery work and now shows in his home of Hawaii and Tahiti and you know, accomplished that dream. So perhaps foolishly, I decided to go make live action films. I'm really going to condense this part, but in the 20 years since, I went to New York Film Academy. I learned the medium. I made, on my own dime, actually, I made some little short films that made it into the festivals. I then made bigger films on other people's dime that won awards, and some of them garnered distribution, one of them with Lionsgate. And, you know, none of them made me rich, that is for sure, let's be clear, but they garnered critical acclaim, and you know, that kept me going. For good or bad, it encouraged me. At some point, I did look at my IMDb page and thought, wow, I have original screenplay credits on several films that were IMDb SAG films with distribution. That is something a lot of writers fight long and hard for. So many friends of mine came to LA with their 2-year plan or their 5-year plan, and their goal was to get original screenplay credits. I wasn't even looking for that. I wrote the screenplays in order to tell the stories. It was inseparable to me. So they actually call it an auteur. At that time, I guess I thought of myself as a writer-director or an auteur. But I wasn't trying to be a writer or die. And there I was with a writing resume. So I did click, and I thought, I need to put that on the front burner. I have a lifelong love of writing. I got that typewriter at 7 or 9 or whatever it was. And I started indulging what I call creative nonfiction essays. The genre didn't exist at the time, and they were just called, I guess, personal essays. But now there's this, thanks to Oprah, there's a genre called creative nonfiction. So I had just discovered David Sedaris, if any of you know him. And so I started writing humorous stories from my own life and performing them in spoken word events. I even founded my own little spoken word event that's really taken off since then. And then they started getting published in collections, anthologies, winning awards. Again, none of it made me rich, but I'm very proud of those accolades. And it kept me going, again, for good or bad. And then that led in 2012 to the publication of my first what's called young adult urban fantasy novel, The Nameless Prince. And that was through Twilight Times, a very small imprint. And then in 2016, the second installment of the trilogy came out. And so all of this has created a sort of momentum. And I began to identify as a storyteller. That word gets thrown around a lot. But I had to realize at some point, even when it was visual storytelling, I did have an agenda, and that can be death to art. But I very much realized at some point, maybe in my 20s, maybe at 30, I thought, everything I've ever done does fall under one umbrella, and that umbrella is storytelling. What I didn't say is I began teaching at my alma mater, Art Center, and I've taught there for over 20 years. So the short version of that is I had a mortgage, I had bought a home. I was taking a 1-year sabbatical from Disney. It was unpaid, but it was kind of built into my contract. And I thought I needed a little bread and butter money because I had a mortgage. It turned out I didn't need it, I would have been fine, but I also had wanted to give back. It sounds very cliche, but I absolutely wanted to give back and extend myself. It took me 8 years into my time at Disney to feel that I had anything to offer. I was learning and growing all day, every day, and just didn't feel that I had any business teaching. But one day, the desire to give back took over. And it's partially because I don't have kids. I mean, I have 22 nieces and nephews because we're Italian, but I didn't have kids of my own. So it was a way of kind of being bigger than myself and giving back. The classes that I pitched were background painting, because it's largely what I did at Disney for 11 to 12 years, if you count the sabbatical. And what I should say is, even though I painted production backgrounds on all of those films I mentioned, in 2 cases, I went on 18 months early on Lion King and Tarzan both, and visually developed the look of the environments. So I had a little viz dev experience and screen credit under my belt. So the 2 classes that I pitched at Art Center were so needed because, like I said, there were no entertainment tracks in any art schools at that time. So man, I had waiting lists of 20 people. People were lapping it up. Disney was already recruiting from Art Center, but not seeing what they needed in portfolios. So again, very popular classes. And then slowly, the whole entertainment track took shape around my electives. Then it diverged, as some of you may know, into entertainment arts and entertainment design. The 2 classes that ran for my entire 20 years teaching at Art Center were background painting and visual development. As an instructor, of course, it felt best to fall back on really hardcore principles like light logic, color theory, perspective, composition, because they were black and white, and there were conventions and traditions that existed that I could point to. God knows art is subjective, right? We can't even define it. We can't define beauty. So I very much liked teaching things that were not black and white because it's still not empirical and it's not scientific. But at least you have convention and tradition to fall back on. Ironically, what began to happen is it was less satisfying teaching technique, right? Or nuts and bolts, as we call it. And it was more satisfying in the visual development class when I could see these entire worlds coming out of my students. I would assign an intellectual property and just see the myriad of ways that people would interpret the text and sort of see their thumbprint or their soul in the work. And I became more of an orchestrator than a teacher, if that makes sense. I just created the space in which they could feel safe. I nurtured their creativity. They interfaced with one another and encouraged one another. And it was just a beautiful thing. And that was way more satisfying to me than teaching the background painting class. So really wrapping it up, that's why I'm so passionate about not technique, not the nuts and bolts, but the why part of the equation. Meaning, why are we telling stories in the first place? So on the microcosmic level, I call it, on the subjective personal level, it's cathartic, right? We love to create, and we can go into that more later perhaps, but why do we do it? It is cathartic for the individual. By extension, in theory, it's cathartic for the patron, they call it. And then by extension, society benefits. So I call it personal transformation and societal evolution. That sounds really heady and academic, but I would hope by the end of the series, if you do end up registering for the series, it'll all make sense. And it's not elitist, it's what we're all doing all day, every day, whether we're aware of it or not. So I'm gonna put a bow on this part of it by saying, you know, in teaching for 20 years, I learned more about the creative process, the different relationships my students have with their creative process, what I call the artistic journey at large, the lifelong journey, and the function or the role of art and storytelling and creativity in the world. It's huge. So I couldn't be more passionate about it. There are plenty of artists on production who just see themselves as having a craft. There's nothing wrong with that. There's some damn good artists out there who have mastered, let's say, color theory and can color script a film like nobody else. You know, understanding the cultural implications of a given color palette, the physiological levels of different colors, the archetypal associations with a given color palette. But they don't necessarily have stories of their own to tell. They're content to pay their mortgage, put food on the table, and feed their children. It's all good. I like to offer this kind of content because many of us do have stories to tell. We're not just cogs in an enormous machine. We are creative people with different vehicles of expression. And a lot of my students wanted to go into production to learn the pipeline and then eventually make their own films or tell their own stories. I'm catering to all of that. I also think even those visual development artists who love the studio system and have no desire to do their own intellectual properties, the ones we love that have that flair, that sort of, I don't want to say style because that sounds superficial, but that voice, that authentic voice that just can't be bottled or purchased. Those ones understand all this on an innate level or on an academic level. They understand the function of storytelling in the big picture. Okay, Tina, I think that that kind of explains why CTN and I are both passionate about the role of storytelling and why it should be talked about. I initially had said, you know, there's enough books out there on technique. I'll recommend them, but it doesn't necessarily fulfill me to talk about technique. It fulfills me more to talk about why. Why are we all doing this?
And we are very grateful to have you addressing this. That was brilliantly put forth. Thank you so much for that journey. I have a question here I'd like to ask you. You mentioned about schools and you've taught at Art Center. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, what are your thoughts about traditional schools? Are they cultivating creativity, or what is your thought on schools and the creative journey?
Hi, Babetta, by the way, I love you. Who else do I know? Okay, well, that is a big question. I mean, right? It's a big question. Let me just open my mouth. I have taught it, LA Academy of Figurative Art. I founded the animation program at Laguna Art Institute. I taught at Art Center. I have glimpsed a lot of different cultures because every school has a different culture. You know, and I would say private schools have a very different culture than like Cecil. I taught at Long Beach State for 5 minutes. You know, so generalizations are tough. I would say, you know, Art Center, I defend Art Center a lot because it's my alma mater. You know, I went to, sorry for the long answer in advance, but I went to Saturday High literally back in 85. So I've had, you know, 35, I'm not a mathematician, 35 plus year relationship in addition to graduating from there and teaching there. So I defend it. But we've all heard that thing, oh, Art Center has a brand, Art Center has a stamp, Art Center has a look. Yeah, it does. But it's overrated, meaning it's overblown. I would say the brand is professional. I'd say the brand is good. And sometimes it's more about the packaging, the way it's presented, that people are responding to. Yes, there are instructors, especially at Art Center, who create minions and their students emulate their work because they think that's what's going to get them scholarship. And they're not wrong. You know, everything exists. But this phenomenon of the stuff you see in the gallery at Art Center reflecting the aesthetic of the instructors, you're not imagining it. It does happen. But there's also an acknowledgement that if we squelch the individual voices, the authentic voices of each incoming generation, and we just create mimics or minions, where's the next genius, you know, where's the next generation of genius going to come from? So I would say, I don't know the culture at all the schools. I'm familiar with RISD, and that's Rhode Island School of Design, and Savannah, SCAD, it's called, Savannah College of Art and Design. I know the big schools and I know their reputations, but all I can really speak to are the schools that I've taught at. As a generalization, I'm trying to remember the original question, but as a generalization, I think my opinion is an atelier program like LAFA doesn't get any better than that. It's the best one on the West Coast. You need to learn. I mean, if you're interested in going that path and taking your journey seriously and doing what the old masters did or what every artist during the Renaissance did, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. People that put their nose to the grindstone and take that journey seriously need to be learning the academic part at a rigid program like LAFA. It's perfect for what it is. But I always hit a wall when, I don't want to name any names, but like, let's say one figure, let's just talk about figure drawing. You might have one instructor saying, oh, it's all gesture, that's all that matters. Every stroke needs to be expressive and express the gesture. Then you'll have another one, and I'm not naming names, who will say, oh no, it's all anatomy and structure. It's all anatomy and structure. It says more about the individual, doesn't it? And so in life, I respond or I relate to people who are not black and white about anything. And it's called actually convergent thinking instead of divergent thinking. And they sort of synthesize and assimilate. In other words, they're judicious about their education, and they take what resonates and that becomes their voice. There's nothing wrong with getting under the wing of an institution like LAFA or even one mentor. I love that, and really learn their way. But then how about change it up a little and spend time under somebody else's wing and then find your own voice? What happens is humans, and this is why I don't like to make generalizations about art schools. It's a human compulsion to feel secure in a black and white system or worldview. I hope this is kind of answering the question. So yes, I think all schools by nature stifle creativity because it's a learning environment. It's just what it is. It's on the individual to see everything as an opportunity. Everything is what you make it, they say, right? So if you just garner what you can from any and all experiences in life and you're judicious about it and you synthesize them, that is what I admire. So Art Center is accused of stifling creativity, can't argue, but I think it's true of just the educational system as is. I will shut up, but the Waldorf system supposedly caters to different types of learners. I think we're on the right path with that idea, but I also know as an instructor that tried and true methods of learning have not changed. So it is on the individual to look out for the big picture, look out for your soul.
That was brilliantly put. And you answered the question very well. Thank you so much. There's a side question to that. So if you are going to the university or the school or LAFA and you're taking these courses that are teaching you crafts and how to do them, what can someone do to cultivate their own voice while they're doing that, since it's not going to come from the school? Thank you.
Right. Well, I admire students that look out for themselves. I didn't see that coming, but I look out for their souls. I mean, I see it a mile away. When I see students that are, I guess subversive is the word, they're pretty subversive and almost skeptical of anything dogmatic. I see them approaching every assignment as an expression, and they would rather get an F. I'm not necessarily advocating this, but I can see it a mile away when a student would rather get an F than sell out. So they find the love in all projects, they make it their own. And so I think it takes maturity to do that. I was 19 when I started at Art Center. I was a good boy. I delivered what was asked for, but I found my voice way later in life. So when I see a very mature student that knows, you know, it's my money, I'm gonna get what I want. I never thought I'd hear myself say this, because I want everyone to do what I'm prescribing in the classroom, of course. And I think I got that 90% of the time because they respected me. But I can see that they're looking out for their soul and they're finding the expression in everything and not being too rigid about it. But I also think keeping a sketchbook. I was horrible at that. During art school, my sketchbooks became shopping lists, screenplays, they became everything but sketchbooks. I did what you're not supposed to do. I would tear things out that I was embarrassed of and throw them away. I'm a horrible sketchbook person, but I love looking at them. I admire students who continue to find their voice despite this assignment and this regiment of this job. Does that make sense? So while doing the jobs, keep exploring your own passions, and that could be a concept that you're inspired by. It could be a medium or technique that you want to explore that's going to expand your repertoire, and that's more style than voice. But I think the style reflects the voice, meaning the worldview and what you have to say. So anyway, I hope that helps. Sketchbook, always looking out for yourself and not selling out.
Wonderful. I think you know this person, Babetta.
Of course I do. Hi, Babetta.
Yeah, she had a question. There are so many artists applying for jobs and working in the industry. Do you have any advice on how do you make your portfolio stand out and unique to yourself?
Right. Well, I don't know that I want to turn this into the portfolio workshop that we've offered for 12
Exactly. I will leave that with you.
No. I have an answer, but it's going to be brief is my point. Because I do think that's a totally valid question. And I will try to keep this one short. But because it is related, there's a whole section in this upcoming series called Finding Your Voice. And that is the portfolio, right? I taught the portfolio class at Art Center for 6 years. I didn't mention that, but I co-taught with Bill Wallen for 6 years. So we created those portfolios that were landing dream, not just positions, but dream careers for people at Disney, DreamWorks, PDI, Pixar. So it's a valid question because the workshop is about finding one's authentic voice and then connecting that with a sense of purpose. But that is exactly what you're packaging in a portfolio.
That makes perfect sense.
Quick-ish answer is, I wasn't lucky to get in. I worked damn hard to get in. But the truth is there was no competition because, like I said, no art schools were cranking out the right content. The first time I went to CTN, Tina, I was like, holy like there were people from Russia, Germany. I had no idea how competitive it was until I got CTN would have made me, I mean, it's wonderful for all the learning that's available and the exposure, but it would have scared the crap out of me if I was a 19-year-old still in school. So it is very competitive, but the beauty is the animation industry is not going anywhere, nor is gaming, nor is AI. You know, virtual reality, it's all just gonna keep exploding. So there's plenty of work and it's not going anywhere. How to stand out? That is kind of a portfolio question, but maybe packaging your voice the right way makes for that portfolio that's gonna stand out. There's no one answer to it because one studio might be looking for somebody with a style or flair because they want that particular style, voice, flair to influence the look of their upcoming project. Then another studio for another position might be looking for somebody that can adapt stylistically and that's versatile. And that person sort of might be serving a more seamless function in the production pipeline. So it's probably too long a conversation, but maybe, I don't know, like in terms of the big picture, it's better to be true to oneself. Because if you alter your content to get a position because your goal is to get into the industry or die, that's called selling out. And you wouldn't be happy in that position that you landed anyway. So I hope that makes sense. I'm advocating for being true to yourself, really, even if it's just here and there throughout your journey, taking stock and figuring out why you're doing what you're doing. And what is inspiring you to regurgitate and share something about the human condition or something about life that you wish to impart? You know, if you're true to that, then you'll land the perfect job for you, not the one you manipulated your content to get.
Brilliant. There's so much copying going on, with fan art and people wanting to get into jobs, and so they will copy a style.
Right.
Um, and to be true to your voice, what is I know you're going to talk about this in the series, but where do you feel unique ideas come from, and where can people gain inspiration to have their voice?
Wow. Well, to me, those two questions are related because,
Mm-hmm.
as we all know, let's say in Japan, there's more of a tradition of using proprietary imagery or existing intellectual properties as your calling card. Here, we're catching up. We're more okay with that than ever. Was that English? We're more okay with that than ever. But for dinosaurs like me, the mimicry you can smell a mile away. And I know other creativity advocates that feel there's a little too much mimicry right now, which is fine in one's learning process. I know a lot of artists who did their Egon Schiele phase and their Klimt phase, and then they would do Leyendecker and emulate Norman Rockwell. And oh my God, that is so good for finding one's style. It really is. I actually did it at 30 something. Halfway into my teaching, I just admired Ed Yushiro, a student. I admired his work so much. And I just asked him first. And then I said, can I just copy your little doodles, your sketches? And I took them home, and the act of actually getting it in my body and the motor skills, I began to understand intuitively, not intellectually, but I understood every stroke, the long to the short, the straights to the curves. I understood it all only by doing it. So I admire students that in their learning process, in the finding of their voice, emulate, mimic, copy, call it what you want. But eventually that does need to be married with something to say. Now, youth, the beauty is you don't know what you don't know. So I can say you have to have something to say. But unless you've nurtured that inner realm, that's not going to mean anything to you. So what I would say is I agree, in society right now, there's a lot of mimicry. I mean, it sounds horribly judgmental, but many people my age, meaning dinosaurs, feel that way, that the content is lacking and there's too much mimicry. Well, how do you nurture the soul? Well, you make it a priority. So you have something to say. I mean, one answer is if you identify as an artist, in the creative process, one of the steps, there's many models of the creative process, but the Wallace model is the most well-known, but they all acknowledge the idea of identifying the problem to be solved, then germinating on it, then having that lightning strike of inspiration, then executing, or maybe thumbnailing and exploring and lateral exploration, then arriving at the solution. There's different orders, but they're all the same steps. The way I look at it is if you treat your life as a creative venture, identifying the problem to be solved is the equivalent of saying, you know what, I'm an artist, damn it. I identify as an artist. That way you're sort of primed. So then when you walk out the door, the first image you see, maybe it's an incongruous juxtaposition of images, a bird splashing through a puddle, or two things that just don't go together. You know it when it happens, right? And then you have to rush home and quickly scribble a thumbnail, or I take a lot of voice memos lately because I'm really into my writing. I don't rush home. I do it on the street and I look like a crazy person, but I take notes into my phone. So my point is maybe identifying yourself as an artist and then being primed every time you walk out the door is what's going to inspire you. So I can't teach people, you know what I mean, to be human or to have souls, but sitting in on seminars like the one I'm offering and saying, you know what, I do have that in me. There's nothing wrong with just having a love of animation, let's say, from childhood and wanting to be a part of that. Nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of artists that just have a love of film and they don't analyze it. They just want to be a part of it. Eventually, they may realize, okay, but the people making those films that I love so much are driven by something that I'm not yet in touch with. And I think if you want to become one of those powerful voices, that's when you explore, what do I have to say in the world? And I guess my answer is make it a priority, put it on the front burner, do the journaling we talked about, the sketchbooks, take those notes. And I don't know, like honor what inspires you. A lot of people have a silly flash of inspiration during their day, but a lot of things can get in the way of that. Like, oh, that's not worthwhile, or it's not practical. husband or my wife may not see the value of it. It happens all the time. You have a lot of voices shaming you for the seemingly selfish desire to pursue inspiration. The joke is it's actually giving to provide something cathartic that transforms individuals and that evolves society. So I hope this is related to the question, but I almost did an entire documentary called The Pursuit of Art, Selfish or Selfless? And simply put, I was on a date and I made the mistake of saying something like, oh yeah, I've sacrificed for my work. And now I've learned you have to say invested in. Sacrifice sounds like a martyr, right? And the answer I got on that date was, oh, I've heard that feeding the beast stuff before, and blah, blah, blah. And I had never heard that archetype of an artist, that artists leech off society and they get government grants and it's all about feeding some kind of beast. I was not familiar with that. I was only familiar with artists who were living their best life and contributing. So I began to wonder, what is this chasm between the two archetypes that society holds for artists as visionaries that contribute, or sort of a sleazier version, which is those who leech off and get to play around all day, every day. So if that makes sense, a lot of forces in society will shame you and discourage you for following your muse. F them.
Exactly. Really well
Long
put.
answer.
People are really responding in the chat too. They're saying, what a reality check to hear in
Oh,
humane words.
Oh, wow. I love that.
I'm
glad.
Thank you so much. Another thought is, the symbolism that artists are loners. I know animation is very collaborative, and
I'm sorry. Can you back up?
Yeah, there's a symbolism that will say artists are loners. And can you talk a little bit? And I know animation is very collaborative. Can you talk about the role of collaborating with other artists, and is it valuable versus doing it alone?
Of course, that's a huge conversation. Sorry, Siri's trying to get my attention. She liked something we were saying and she piped up on my iPad. That is a huge question. So they're all long answers, but when I was in art school, you're pretty much forced to read Letters to a Young Poet, if anyone's familiar. Rilke, a poet, wrote a book called Letters to a Young Poet. It contains a lot of cliches, actually, not even archetypes, but cliches about what it is to be an artist. I loved it, but it's supposedly the artist's handbook. But the over-romanticized notions in it are, you have to suffer for your art, you have to have angst for your art. And then the one most germane or prescient to this question is, all true creative inspiration comes from solitude. That may largely be why artists identify as artists, as loners, or why society has put that label on them. But I want to argue, of course, all true inspiration comes from solitude. But it's no different if you're a sculptor. It's no different whether you're a sculptor or a writer or a painter or sending a rocket into space. It's all the same process. So we just don't, we give the label creative to the arts, but engineers, mathematicians, creativity is manifest in every aspect of life. So my sister wrote a great song because her muse was her songwriting. It was her storytelling. Her husband couldn't relate. But then one day it clicked and he said, oh, my running, when I jog and I lose myself and I find I won't put words in his mouth, but the beta waves, it's no different. So I think all true inspiration does come from solitude. And I really admire relationships where both partners give the other the freedom to indulge that, with the recognition that it's not selfish on the part of those artists that we slap the label on, because we're all doing it in our own ways. So I hope that's some form of an answer, but solitude is important for the creative process. And I'm being 100% honest and transparent now. That's why I don't love, and I haven't talked about my 20 years since Disney, but I've been out there freelancing and being an independent contractor and sometimes going in-house now a lot for many different cultures, big studio, mostly, thankfully, big studios, because I feel like there's more protections built in. But anyway, I've worked for Blue Sky in Greenwich, Connecticut. I've worked for Animation Lab in Israel, of quite a variety of cultures. But I'm not a big fan, to be honest, of what's called the open floor plan. were all kinds of studies on it saying, oh, it increases interactivity and productivity. And in the end, that didn't turn out to be true. It was a money saver. So believe it or not, I'm fine with a cubicle. At Disney, I had both. I had an office for a cubicle. Sometimes I shared, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I felt like I was more part of the team when I was out there in a cubicle exposed. But for the most part, I'm not a dog and pony show. I don't love feeling like, oh, is there somebody behind me watching me paint? I prefer a little more focus. So trends come and go. But yes, Tina, I would say collaboration is everything on an animated film. In every aspect of the production pipeline, it's a necessity to not be too precious about your work, of course, to realize, and there's all kinds of storytelling, right? You can call it directing by committee. Let's say Disney, DreamWorks, PDI, a lot of these big companies, they have stockholders to please. They have a brand that they need to honor, meaning the public are expecting a certain brand from them in the content that they put out. And then internally, although I'm a big fan of a singular vision, this is going to date me, but I always use Tori Amos as an example. She's a singer-songwriter who has literally never had a top 10 hit, let alone a top 40 hit. But the record labels believed in her vision enough and her small following enough to keep renewing her contracts and putting out her work. So I tend to respond to, a garage band more than something the A&R people at a label cobbled together for the almighty dollar. But there are all kinds of storytelling. So Roger Allers, the director of Lion King, he's a good friend. I meet with him regularly, and we still talk about that one moment in time where so many confluences came, this is redundant, but so many things came together. And it was like, oh my God, the bank at the box office correlated with complete artistic integrity and literary value. How does that happen? Well, because it struck a chord with people. So when you direct by committee and everybody's hand is in the soup, it's beautiful in a different way than a singular vision. I love it when you have your finger on the pulse of, it's actually not the collective unconscious, it's collective consciousness, I think. Everybody in that studio, and it went from 500 to over 4,000 people in the 11 years I was there. But everyone in there is living on the planet at a given moment in time. So all their sensibilities are dovetailing in the product that comes out. That includes humor. That includes cultural references. If you think about it, there's a little offset, I almost said décalage in French. There's a little chasm between what becomes a Disney classic and what is kind of a flash in the pan. So think about Aladdin for a moment where, for a minute, and nobody's going to know, Arsenio Hall, woo, woo, woo. There's a moment where the genie goes, woo, woo, woo. Does anybody know what the hell that is nowadays? No, because it was a moment in time. So there is a way to make something a classic, and there's a way to make it really relevant for these bratty kids at this moment. I'm kidding. But I think being a storyteller is being a master of what's universal and is going to stand the test of time, and what is culturally specific and specific to a moment in time. So not all artists can do the studio thing. Full, transparency. We're not all cut out for it. I've had plenty of artists that would much rather be in a cornfield in Iowa with their laptop. And those careers are available. That's the beauty now, especially during COVID, right? A lot of studios are getting way more comfortable with working remotely. So either way, I think what's necessary is the ability to take feedback. And a big one for me, because I do like to keep morale up, and you have to see that your work, even if it's just the grain of an idea, is contributing something. So a really great supervisor or even director of a film, when they're disseminating feedback, a really great one won't just say, okay, back to the drawing board, out the window, or they'll at least say, you know what, there's a grain of something here you could build on. So you just have to have, I think, the ability to take feedback, although in my opinion, you do need some encouragement that it's not just completely futile, that it's contributing and it's headed somewhere. But it takes a certain disposition. I will shut up, but I have noticed many artists, this goes back to the solitude idea, many artists are internal. And you could just call it shyness, it's fine. there's entire books on cultural shyness. But if artists, not all of them are this way, but in my, for that documentary I mentioned, I interviewed a lot of artists, some professional, some students. My hunch was correct that a lot of us chose art because it actually wasn't safe to express ourselves, or we didn't have the ability to because we were shy or whatever. So we went inward and found some solace within, and well-being, put whatever label on it you want, well-being, inner peace, solace. Then by extension, we shared it, and magically we touched somebody or inspired them, and we felt that. So that's called connection. So I think of this idea of expressing oneself and indirectly connecting with people, a form of validation that you exist. That's addictive. So I did have a hunch that almost all of us initially found this craft because we had a need to express and a need to connect. Then we might have learned healthy ways to do that. I was a shy kid who can't shut up now. I'm Italian, so I kind of did the full 360. But even if you find healthy ways of connecting, you still have this craft that you live with. And it's a beautiful thing if you honor it. So what I would say is many of my students would be on the complete left side of their brain. No, other way around, the right side. They'd be, let's say their office door was shut. They were working for 4 hours, not speaking, not using the other half of their brain, but kind of lost in, I said beta waves a moment ago. They're lost in the creative process. When that door flies open and you have to form words, I'm sure we've all experienced this, your motor skills are not available to you. So I know I learned that during my training on Lion King. Like, my door could fly open at any moment. Doug Ball would come in and I'd have to hold a conversation with him. It was tough for me. And I eventually learned, and now I really value that. But switching hemispheres of the brain is huge. And I've seen students kind of beat themselves up about their inability, because they would show up after an all-nighter, we call them at Art Center. They'd show up after an all-nighter and just be completely unable to even form a sentence. So my advice is work on that now. I mean, you don't have to, not everyone's going to be, the word came up yesterday, chipper. Like, not everyone needs to be chipper, but you need to learn that skill of, you need to learn social skills along with your craft. Does that, Tina, at all answer that?
It does. That was really, really a perfect answer. It brought up a question that's not in the chat, but I'll ask you this question. It seems to be inherent in a lot of artists to feel like they're not good enough. You know, this whole imposter syndrome issue that, you know, along with collaborating with other artists and being able to communicate is this feeling that, you know, you don't belong there. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I swear, Tina, you have like an X-ray into my soul. These are all the things. No, these are all very important to me. And God, okay. So when I was at Art Center, I kind of had blinders on, meaning, and it was a protective mechanism. It was a survival mechanism. I didn't compare myself to other people. And maybe that came from, you know, I was a short, freckly kid and with a space in my teeth. And if I had started out on this planet comparing myself to people, I would have slit my wrists a long time ago. So I'm kind of grateful for that, because I was not in the habit of comparing. It was always me against my own potential. So call me a wise kid, but I never had that going on. So it extended well into art school. And I remember not looking around, just thinking, I didn't get intimidated. If I saw something that I admired, I just thought, oh, well, wow, I could do that. I haven't done it yet, but I could do that. I mean, that's the most prideful thought that I had. I could do that. And I want to, you know, maybe we'll focus on that in the future. But somehow magically it did not discourage me. I was well into my 20s at Disney when I was strong enough to look around and go, holy crap, I need to play catch up. And that's when I really began nurturing my voice and finding my own style and playing catch up. So there's no one answer, but I think in life, we can all choose to be intimidated all day, every day. There's always, now I'm going to be crude, there's always someone with bigger or more junk in the trunk, or, you know, guys, I mean, they call it the Adonis syndrome. It's like, nobody thinks men suffer from body image issues, but it's at an all-time high with all the steroids available. Like, we could all be intimidated about any number of things. So I think art reflects life in that be inspired by the powerful work that you feel is better than you. Be inspired by it, learn from it. I use art as inspiration all the time. If life isn't giving you inspiration when you walk out the door, there is nothing wrong with going, oh my God, what did Arthur Rackham capture in that illustration? And use that as your leaping off point. So I don't know the answer. We're all different, but I would say do not be crippled by comparing yourself to other people. That is a dead end road. One way out of that, one way out of being paralyzed by or intimidated by all the competition is we all have a unique voice, right? My sister's a vocal instructor. We're not all Mariah, I can't say that anymore because she thrashed her voice, but we're not all Mariah Carey 20 years ago. We're not all Pavarotti, is that a better one? We all have a limited instrument, but nobody's texture and ambiance and all those nuances of a voice are unique to that person. It's like a thumbprint. So maybe that's another reason to find your voice. That's sort of another poster boy, another poster, another call to action to find your voice, because nobody has your voice. Okay, I hope that helps, because I think everybody's good at something. Everyone has what they lead with, and they don't show this. How about that? The people that you admire are not showing the stuff they're bad at, right? I took basketball when I was quite young, and everybody else grew and I didn't. Do you think I go around shooting hoops all day, every day? No. So there are ways out.
I love that thumbprint analogy. Yeah, everyone's got.
Well, that is, isn't that kind of the only way out, Tina? There's so many good artists out there, but we all have unique voices and a unique contribution. It all goes back to finding that voice and actually connecting it with a sense of purpose. What can I give to, this is huge, what can I give to the planet that nobody else can? If you can buy at all that you don't have to get too woohoo about this, but that consciousness, I think somebody asked a while ago, where do ideas come from? We don't know. We don't know where memories live, for that matter. Memories are the cobbling together of former sensory impressions. They don't live anywhere geographically in the brain. We don't know whether we generate thoughts electrically within our brains or whether we receive them. That took me a while to grasp that one. We're not just antennas. We don't receive ideas, we generate them. I resisted that one. But the truth is, consciousness is a field, like the quantum field, and it's electrical and it's all interconnected. So maybe, I don't know, the way out is like to find one's voice, to connect it with a sense of purpose means all these ideas that are floating around are meant to be synthesized by collective intelligence. We're meant to be on the cutting edge. There's a reason every generation does better. Athletically, look at the personal best of a long jumper, or, you name the discipline, every generation gets better. You could say that's epigenetics, right? That it's being passed on through DNA. You could also say everybody's tapping into this, what's called a noosphere. It's that realm we're talking about. Everybody's tapping in and carrying it to the next level. So I guess I'm saying the way out of being intimidated and paralyzed by the competitiveness is identifying your need, taking the time to figure out why you do what you do, finding that authentic voice, but most importantly, connecting it back and understanding I'm on this planet because I was given this obligation to contribute and carry that baton and pass it to the next level and be on the cutting edge of my art form, whatever that is.
That's very well said. That's a lot to unpack there, and a really good topic.
Rewind because I liked it.
Yeah, it was
great. Might take a while, but I think it did make a little bit of sense.
Oh, no, it made a lot of sense. They just cut to the core. With all of the information that's out there and all of the energy that's coming at you as the creator, what is your approach or advice to setting goals for an artist, or staying focused? Or do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, I think there might be more in there. I'm a pain in the ass. Could you just read it one more time?
Yeah. What is your approach to goal setting? And I sort of added to it that as an artist, there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of input. And what is your approach to staying focused on your voice or your project or setting goals?
Well, making it a priority, I kind of hinted that, you know what I mean? Like honoring it, I call it the artistic journey at large, or the muse, the calling. You've got to honor it first, right? There's always something vying for our attention. It does a little bit go back to, like I said, those discouraging voices from society, from your partner, from whomever, that discourage you from following your muse. I hope that's related. There's a great film my sister has screened called Who Does She Think She Is? And it's about the female version of that, how society doesn't allow women, as you know, to be career women, to be career people and mothers and da 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 da. Well, when you look through the art history books, where are the women? I mean, there's a million reasons they've been written out of history, right? In every discipline, not just the arts. But anyway, I don't know. I think men go through their own version of it, maybe in a bigger way, because men are taught to be practical above all else. We're socialized to be the breadwinners, especially in Western culture anyway. Right. And so I think I kind of bit my tongue at that screening, because I thought, if you only knew, like the arts are seen as sissy, honestly. They're not masculine, blah, blah, blah. They're sissy. You have all these things that you could fall victim to that discourage you from pursuing a career in art. But women have their own version of that. So anyway, I think there's a million voices that could discourage you. If you honor it, dig in your heels, have a sense of entitlement about it, but then take the steps to nurture it, which might be that sketchbook, like I said, might be identifying yourself as an artist and having your antenna primed all day, every day, and doing, I'm not good at this, but going to those workshops, making it somewhat disciplined. I went to the workshops when I was at Disney because they were right down the hall and I had no excuse. I went to drawing workshops all through Art Center because it was part of my education and they were sort of obligatory. They were right there in the building. But when you're out on your own, whether you're an aspiring animation artist or you just finished school or still in school, it's kind of on you to find those workshops in your neighborhood. That's why I think CTN offers such a great resource for people. But anyway, just keep up your craft and keep flexing different muscles, and keep primed.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a motto, just do it anyway.
Right. Because isn't the rest all just an excuse?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's just an excuse.
Right.
Just do it anyway.
Right. I love
You know what to do.
Right.
I'm sorry, your workshop place that the owners were fighting and throwing things. That's a little.
It seriously was like, okay, I could be with my parents right now. Like, I don't need to be. I'm kidding. They've been together over 60 years. God love them.
So this is all powerful information for storytellers and creators and writers, anyone who's creating anything. I'm really enjoying this. I hope everyone else is too. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in your lessons or lectures or meetups?
Yes, I think we hinted at some of it, as a sampler platter, but to be really clear, because again, it might click more for people when they hear what each week is going to be about. So of course, the umbrella is Story and Image. That's the name of the 5-part lecture series. And the description, you can see this all on the website. It's a 5-part lecture series with weekly installments, exploring the creative process. Now, again, this might seem vague, but just think about the terms, the creative process. It's everything. It's why we're here. It's literally why we are here. And if you think of procreation as the ultimate creative process, I will go on and say the universe is here via the same creative process, but that would take some thinking for you to, agree with me on that. So the creative process, huge topic. And a lot of people are really into getting that into the academic arena, into the business arena. It's a really important topic right now, even for non-artists. And then the artistic journey, that's the main umbrella, and the transformative power of narrative and what it is to be a visual storyteller. So again, if some of this seems a little tangential, maybe think about, even though I just want to be a storyboard artist, I just want to be an in-betweener, I just want to serve a niche in production, the artists you admire who are really standing out in all these positions innately understand the power of storytelling, or have, really explored it and learned about it. So I think even those who identify as sort of visual storytellers and maybe not writers, or you might be a storyteller, you're just doing it visually. So I'm trying to cater to all of us creatives, whatever your specific goals are within your career that you're striving for. So, and it is what I'm passionate about. I know it resonates with people. Of course, a little grain of something might resonate with one person and another grain might resonate with somebody else. But I focused on week one is storytelling and transformation. So I hinted at that earlier. How does it transform the individual? The word catharsis. It's a bigger word than I realized, and I really tapped into how huge that word is when I prepared this particular segment. The dictionary definition of catharsis always includes the word usually through art. So to arrive in sort of new emotional territory and sort of overcome something, usually through art. Week two is art reflects life, the creative process as catharsis. So that's where how narrative transforms the individual on the micro level and evolves society on the macro. I won't repeat that because I did go into it earlier and you can rewind, but that's a huge topic and I've actually outlined that one already. It's going to be very fleshed out. Week three is myth and archetype in modern storytelling. The description there is, in this lecture, visual aids will tie a thread from oral storytelling tradition, meaning around the campfire, through the advent of literature, from mythology through the Greek tragedies and Shakespeare to the latest, greatest, and I used to say Matrix film, but that's dated now. So I say the latest, greatest effects-driven blockbuster. So I hope that landed a little bit. Storytelling is a gamut. Those myths, if you subscribe to the sort of idea of Jungian archetypes, those archetypes that informed myths, that then informed, if you like Joseph Campbell, those myths became religion. And then if you take that through the Greek tragedies, Shakespeare, all those same, not just templates, but character archetypes are consistent throughout the latest, greatest Peter Jackson film, if that works for you. Week four is story-driven art direction. Now that, and actually it says story-driven art direction, the nuts and bolts. So that might seem more practical than some of this other stuff to you, and it is. It's sort of taking all these ideas we're talking about and saying, literally, how does that become art direction? So without giving everything away now, basically, if you think of shape language, just shape language, it's talked about a lot. That becomes style, right? The shapes you gravitate towards, the sort of motor skill limitations that your body is capable of, that a lot of things play into your own personal shape language. But there's also, when you study it, a reason that angular shapes create subconscious menace in your antagonist. There's a reason curvilinear shapes are less threatening to the psyche on screen. Color, there's a whole universe to talk about there. I mentioned the physiological level of color earlier, the cultural relativity of given color palettes, the archetypal connections we make, red equals war, blood, passion, danger, alert. You get the idea. But I really break down how myth and archetype, even if it's the archetypal association of a color, how that becomes art direction. It's very comprehensive. Week five is finding your voice. And I think we talked about that a lot today. The way I've expressed it here is how the life journey mirrors the process of finding one's authentic voice, flair, and personal style. I personally separate from, let's say it here, the difference between voice and style. So you could, I guess my take on it is, style can be project specific, right? I worked on many films at Disney. A lot of people would argue, oh, but there's a brand. There's a very specific look to Disney films. That may be true, but we did really branch out, especially in the early, the blue sky stages of visual development, it's called, really did things that were kind of groundbreaking stylistically. And then, of course, for a million reasons, it becomes a little watered down by the time it hits the screen. But I call that style. One's personal voice is a little bit different in that it's not as superficial as shape language, compositional tricks, color choices. It's your emotional imprint. It's your worldview. It's arguably your historical baggage in your DNA. It's your cultural background. It's your likes and dislikes, your temperament, your disposition. It's all those indefinable things that, as I said earlier, become a thumbprint, or I don't know, this elusive thing that you can't bottle. So that's a huge topic in itself. That's why I devoted a whole week to finding your voice. Then it says connecting craft with a sense of purpose, we've already talked about. And then sort of a personal brand versus being adaptable or stylistically or versatile. All kinds of careers out there. If you think of like a Peter DeSev, for example, somebody who already had a huge career as an editorial illustrator and then was invited into animation to influence the look of Blue Skies films, for example. That's a very specific personal brand that found its place in animation. Gerald Scarfe came on to Hercules. I hate having these glasses on. Gerald Scarfe had a huge impact on the look of Hercules, probably the most singular impact anyone has had since Ivan Earl on Sleeping Beauty, if you analyze the look of that film. Very cohesive, very specific. Ivan Earl personally trained every background painter how to adapt his personal style. So those careers exist, but they're a little fewer and a little further between. A lot of viz dev artists strive to be versatile and adaptable because it just increases the amount of projects that they'll be considered for. So there's a conversation that week about personal brand versus adaptability and versatility stylistically. Then the final week is the production. Oh no, that's it. Week 5. Woohoo!
Amazing. I'm so excited about this series for a lot of reasons. Like you had said earlier, there's a lot of workshops out there teaching how to do quadruped walk cycles or real deliberate craft things. And what I really particularly, this resonates with CTN in developing creative talent, developing the unique voice. So thank you so much for bringing
I know we're
this.
wrapping it up. You mentioned a walk cycle. You know, I was trained as a traditional animator by Glenn Keane and Ruben Aquino. So I did my walk cycle, I did my take, I did my bouncing ball. Okay. When I talk about this kind of broad stuff, the beauty is there's always a parallel, right?
Right.
I can talk about a walk cycle and talk about the significance. So that's kind of what I do. I draw everything into the production pipeline or a specific skill. I don't think it's all going to be philosophical. I think the beauty is art lends itself to metaphor. So I could talk about, you know, squash and stretch, or anticipation and action, or kinetic energy and potential energy, the fundamentals of animation, and they're going to have life implications.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
It is more nuts and bolts than I think it's coming across, put it that way.
Because every quadruped walk cycle will animate differently based on what you're talking about.
Yes, and everybody's going to bring something. They're going to bring every animator is going to bring something different.
Right, based on the character, or every bouncing ball will bounce differently based on its personality. Right. So this is very exciting. I think we are getting to the close, unless there was something else you wanted to touch on.
No, I'm good. Unless there's anything else in the Q&A you want to share.
There is a question there. It says, will the series be mostly lectures or also exercises and workshops?
No homework. No homework. So I might do visual aids, you know, within the presentation. I will definitely show work, but I am not requiring homework. That's something, Tina, we've talked about, is down the line, perhaps doing a more interactive class where I am able to comment on artwork and redline it and send it back, that sort of thing. But that's not this particular lecture series.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity coming for some inspiration that came from these lectures, where you might go and create something and you want to show it to Dominick for feedback.
Well, I would love that, or even starting up a class like my VizDev class, where everybody works on a project and we meet in cyberspace and see what everyone else is doing and support one another. That could dovetail off of this, But do you see weekly during this lecture series, there will be a Q&A as well and a chat?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So similar to today.
Yeah, it's like a brainstorming session, interactive, an opportunity to talk with Dominick about things that you're just not going to get anywhere else, really, quite honestly. So
I'm
it's a very
excited.
rare experience.
I'm excited. Can I read through the chat later? Because I'm not seeing all of it, but I'm excited. I hope everybody joins.
Absolutely. And we will follow up. So I just wanted to thank you, Dominick, so much for bringing this to us today. And I want to thank everybody for spending time on your Sunday in front of a computer.
Right.
Right.
Have
But
a great
there's
day, everybody.
so much you get to learn.
Thank you, Tina. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.